Going live in 3, 2, 1, cue.
I'm Alia Daniel,
And I'm Ashaz Arisman.
and you are tuning in at IIUM TV live with the final episode of Political Insights 40 Minutes of Political Knowledge.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe all of IIUM TV's social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and also our latest account on LinkedIn. All right, so we have finally reached our final episode for this season. And also approaching the end of the semester. So, how has this semester been for you, Alia?
Well, personally, I really enjoyed this semester and I definitely gained a lot too. So, actually, I went volunteer in Hululangat to help the flood victims, and it was definitely a new and humbling experience for me. What about you?
Well, I actually went volunteering as well the other day, but only for one day. I went to volunteer at Bukit Lancong in Shah Alam, and it was a very eye-opening experience. I got to see the situation in front of my own eyes, and it was very heartbreaking, honestly, to see all the damage that the flood has created.
Mhm. So, anyways, I hope that in the future we'll be able to volunteer together. So,
Definitely,
yeah.
definitely would love that.
So, anyways, I'm really anticipating tonight's episode. And without further ado, let us welcome our first guest for tonight, Dr. Rabia binti Aminuddin. So, Dr. Rabia is an assistant professor in political science here at IIUM, where he teaches research methodology, public policy analysis, and public administration. So, she's actually also an IIUM alumni, and because she completed her bachelor's degree in political science and did her master's degree in international relation in the International University of Japan. And she also completed her PhD from the University of Manchester in 2015. So, how are you today, Doctor?
Alhamdulillah, thank you very much, Aisha and Alia, for having me tonight.
So, it is an honor to have you here with us today.
Okay, so for our second speaker for tonight is going to be Brother Huzayl bin Muhammad Nursia. Brother Huzayl is currently a final year student in political science. Also, he is very active in the field of student activism, not to mention that he is also the current president for Persatuan Belia Harmoni Malaysia and was the previous president for Harmoni IIUM. So, very recently, actually, he also published a book under Harmony Malaysia called Mahasiswa Menjelang 2030. So, welcome, Brother Huzayl, to tonight's episode. Thank you for joining us. How are you feeling?
Alhamdulillah, very honored to be invited along with Dr. Rabiah and to see new faces of political insights. For this was hosted by my friend Ali Mashraf.
Uh,
Basically,
it's our
thank
honor
you,
to have you
thank
on
you
the
for
show as
inviting.
well. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabia and Brother Huzayl. So, to our viewers, if you have any curiosities, you can just leave it in the chat box, and we'll get back to you during the Q&A session later. So, without further ado, let us start our first question with our first question. And our first question is going to be for Dr. Rabia. So, Dr. Rabia, can you explain a little bit for our viewers about natural disaster management and emergency planning?
Thank you, Alia and Aisha, for the question. I think first of all, maybe we need to acknowledge that disaster management and emergency response is something that is very important, not just at the national level, but also at the global level, right? There was a UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 1994, in which they developed what we call the Yokohama Strategy. And this Yokohama Strategy basically outlines 10 principles of disaster management policy that include 5 priorities for action, right? In which this disaster management policy is supposed to guide all other nations' responses towards disaster And and in this particular priority list, right, it includes identifying, assessing, and monitoring any disaster risk and enhance early warning system. And it also looked into addressing the usage of knowledge, innovation, and education to build a culture of safety and resilience at all levels, right? So we can see that the first priorities are given towards educating people about how to prepare themselves to if there is any disaster happen, right? While only in Priority Act 4 and 5, it focuses more on identifying risk factors for disaster, which calls for a much more proactive action rather than reactive, as what we can see currently. And also Priority Act 5 focuses on strengthening disaster preparedness for effective response at all levels. Yeah. So in this particular Yokohama strategy, we could see that these 5 priority lists basically focusing on disaster management, right? It focuses not only about how to handle the disaster when it already happened, but also how to prepare for disaster. So it covers pre, during, and also post disasters management phases, right? And we could see that this was basically led by Japan, in which Japan, we could see that they have a very strong culture about disaster risk reduction because they basically is located in the ring of fire and they face so many disasters like earthquakes, typhoon, right, storms, floods, so that it makes them much more prepared to deal with disaster, and they brought these particular efforts to the international level. Yeah, so I think in this particular, if you are asking about the natural disaster management and emergency planning, it focuses on these particular aspects. Yeah, while if I can, in Malaysia also, we do have some sort of national disaster management plan, but I think we still have a lot to learn from other countries on how they manage disaster. Yeah. So these in a whole, right? When we talk about disaster management and also emergency planning, we are talking about preparation, right? Of how to first of all, how to help those who were risky, right? Or those who were, how to build a disaster resilient communities, right? And then also we want to build up the resilience by providing the right knowledge, the right tools to prepare the society in facing disasters. Because disaster is something that is, we cannot run away from it, right? So what we can do is to have a much better prepared society, and to build up this preparation or to build a society that is more prepared to face disaster, we need to have a thorough and comprehensive risk planning, right, in place, so that it does not only appear nice on paper, but it, in terms of its implementation also, it is feasible. Yeah. So I think in that particular case, perhaps that is my explanation about what is disaster management and emergency planning.
So when we talk about common natural disasters, so what do you think are the common natural disasters that often take place in Malaysia, and how does the key actors usually respond to this?
Okay, so when we talk about common disasters, Malaysia is actually very lucky in the sense that we just outside of the ring of fire, meaning that we don't have volcanoes, we don't have earthquakes, right? But of course, we are not immune from natural disaster. So when we talk about natural disaster in this particular context of Malaysia, two most common natural disasters that happen in Malaysia is flood and also landslides. Yeah, so these two are the most common natural disasters that happen. But I think I'm not sure if we can call it natural disaster anymore, because some of the disasters are definitely man-made as well. So there are two types of disasters, natural and also man-made, but at times these two are somehow related to one another. What happened is that man-made disasters cause much more damages, or it aggravates the natural disaster to be worse than it is before. Yeah. If I may identify the main key players when we are talking about natural disaster management in Malaysia, right? We are talking about, first of all, we cannot run away from talking about the National Disaster Management Agency, which has come under a lot of flack from the public due to its response towards the recent flood crisis, right? So NADMA, or the National Disaster Management Agency, is basically the main actor when we are talking about disaster management. However, NADMA is at the federal level. Yeah, at the that is also right agencies at the state and also at the local levels. Yeah. So when we are talking about at the federal level, we have NADMA, and then at the state level, right, we have the this is State Disaster Management and Relief Committee. Yeah. And if NADMA is located under the Prime Minister's Department, the State Disaster Management and Relief Committee is chaired by the Secretary of State. And also then it has another, at the local level also, we have another agency, which is the District Disaster Management and Relief Committee, which is supposed to be chaired by the district officer. And I think this is very important because it reflects the three tiers of management at all levels of government. Since Malaysia is a federal system, then we have one at the federal level, which is supposed to be chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister. But since we don't have Deputy Prime Minister currently, it is chaired by the Prime Minister himself, right? And then we have at the state level, which is supposed to be chaired by the Secretary of State. And we have seen at this particular level in the recent flood crisis, there was sort of a bickering among the person in charge, right? Because there was deemed to be confusion between the Chief Minister of Selangor's and also the chair of the State Disaster Management at the state level, right? And then we have the at the district level also, we have this district disaster management committee, which is supposed to be chaired by the district officer. Yeah. So if we are looking at these particular tiers, three tiers of government, right, that we actually have already enough or a good enough process flow at the federal, at the state, and also at the local governments. What happened with the recent flood crisis was that there was finger pointing at who is at fault for allowing the flood crisis to be very much worse, right, compared to the previous years. And I think this is reflected in the speech by the Prime Minister, in which he himself admitted that there were weaknesses in the flood management, especially in Selangor. But he also mentioned that the responsibility to manage the flood disaster should not only be put on the federal agencies, right? That he pointed out that the state and also the authorities at the local government level should also play important role. Yeah, so I think at this particular stage, if you are asking me how do they usually respond to this, right? They usually respond to this by having a much coordinated efforts. However, in this particular recent flood crisis, there seems to be a communication or disjointed coordination. There is no coordination, lack of coordination between all the three levels of governments. Yeah. So federal, state, and also districts might not be talking to one another, that it actually resulted into this. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That was very insightful.
Okay, so I will be moving on to the next question, which is for Brother Huzayl. So, what do you think about the involvement of the youths in the community engagement through volunteerism in assisting the public who are affected by the recent floods?
Right. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Rabiah, and also Alia and also Aisha as the host. I think from youth perspective, right, I like to echo what our rector, IM rector, had said about the issue of our education system, where one of the main issues he mentioned 5 problems with our education system, but one of it is a dehumanization. So what, the problem with our education system is we produce the students in very, I would say, formalistic way, where our education system is soulless and also dehumanized. So when it comes to things like flood issues and disaster, it can be seen that students were very engaged in the issue. We being a volunteers help people in affected community outside. So somehow, as a students, we managed to basically have opportunity to go outside of the problem that mentioned by our rector. First of all, so the involvement of youth in community engagement through volunteerism in assisting public who are affected by the recent flood issue, we can see first, before I start with giving points, just a disclaimer that public policy is not my forte. So Dr. Rabiah, if I say something doesn't make sense, just correct me. And it is solely based on experience, right? So it can be seen, and obviously IUM specifically or especially, we very active in sending our volunteers out. And if I'm not mistaken, 2 weeks ago, or presumably 2 weeks ago, we sent out about 4 buses to Hulu Langat to have people there. So it is very, very huge in terms of number lah. Okay. Other than that, in my personal experiences, in terms of Harmoni Malaysia, so when first we heard about flood issue in Shah Alam, Seri Muda, right? And if I'm not mistaken, the first occurs in Seri Muda, then lead to Hulu Langat. So when we first heard happen in Seri Muda, we have our ad hoc meeting. So we just decided to proceed with three groups, which first we focus on media advocacy, second squad Turun Padang, which focuses on sending volunteers, and squad Hantar Barang, which we focus on PPI who in need of things, then we buy and we sell. So basically youth, or particularly mahasiswa, given a huge opportunity in engaging or involved in helping a public to being a part of the ecosystem lah, in this flood issue. So it is interesting because we can see, like what Dr. said, the disaster issue should not be blamed only to federal, which is NATMA, but we have 3 levels of disaster management, district and also state. But we can see that they are very, very slow. And I think, yeah, we will see this on the next question on the problem with bureaucracy. So when we first move our volunteers in Harmony, I personally observed that youth have 3 main characteristics that I would say old people or official organization should consider lah. Okay, first, they like to execute more than they want to have meetings. So that's youth. Okay, youth ni dia tak suka sangat untuk meeting 2-3 jam. They want to execute fast. So what happened is that if you can see, first 2-3 days, more the parties that have more is NGOs and also youth organization compared to government, or also more bigger official organization going down to public. Secondly, youth is very dynamic, meaning that they can very adaptive lah. They can change their role and yeah, basically if we put them here, they can perform well, or yeah, they can perform well. And lastly, gangship. So what happened in Harmony? Why we manage to arrange our volunteers very fast? I would say I would consider very fast because we go for turun padang on the second day of the disaster, of the flood, because we offer the value of gangship lah. So in conclusion, Alhamdulillah, in this flood issue, youth were given big opportunity to engage, and big thanks to university in terms of providing platform for our students. In another part of cuti and so on, we have another argument there lah. And also to wrap up another points, people or official organization need to understand what is the nature of youth, how we move and what our psyche. So basically, yeah, we like to execute and we are very dynamic and we keen to fall to gangship. Wallah alam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brother Huzayl. So from what Brother Huzayl just stated, we can see that the youth now, they are very engaged in recent issues, in current issues, and so on. So we are very thankful for the youth today. So before we proceed further into tonight's topic, we will be having a commercial break. Stay tuned with us and see more of our intriguing discussion coming up next.
Welcome back to Political Insights. We are currently discussing on the unprecedented floods that happened recently in Malaysia with Dr. Rabiah and Brother Huzayl. Now, let us continue with our conversation with the next question.
So for the first question goes to Brother Huzayl. So back then in 1971, we all know that Kuala Lumpur was hit by a major flood, swelling up the Klang, Batu, and Gombak rivers. Exactly 50 years later, on 16th of December, history repeated itself, and the futile response left many families affected. Although the weather was not under anyone's control, but our response to such situations is in our hands. So, what measures could have been taken by the general public, especially the youth, to save the flood victims and the survivors?
All right. So we talk in the context of something that is beyond our control of plan. Natural disasters that come very basically very sudden. So what roles can youth play, or basically what important measures that can be taken by youth? I would say first of all, we as a youth need to be informed with what happened in our country actually. So and we have to be very particular from what platform we receive our information. So as a youth, today's I'm pretty sure that we no longer watching television. We don't know what happened in TV3 anymore. I personally don't know what drama are going on in TV3. So we finish our screen time on phone and social media, Twitter, TikTok, and so on and so forth. And the problem with postmodern era is that the information is there, and there is no restriction. So it can be misinformation or over-informed or misinterpretation of information. So there's this our problem. So as a youth, we have to be very particular in what source we receive our information, and to be sure that we are informed on what happened in our country. Because like Doctor mentioned before, kita dah ada nakma kan, we have planned, but why the execution is very late? Okay, I personally believe that it is not because of the bureaucratic issue per se, but also we have very unstable government during that time. So when the flood come, is a bad for government lah. We have very unstable government. We if I'm not mistaken, during flood happened, we also have PRN Sarawak, right? So yeah, we are very unmanageable during those times. So youth need to be very informed and know what happened in our country and what caused that lead to the flood. And I very like what Doctor said. It is not natural disaster, but some sort of man-made disaster actually. Okay, first of all. Second of all, youth need to be in the ecosystem. So as I mentioned before, we don't move by ourselves. So there's many parties helping or involved in helping basically who affected in natural disasters. So as a youth, we need to be in the ecosystem, join any organization that offer the volunteerism, the platform to be volunteers, and to note that every role in this particular situation is important, not just let's say Alia and Aisyah cannot turun padang, cannot go as a volunteers. Okay, doesn't matter. You can be at background or belakang tabir punya kerja lah. Okay, either you have team media to advocate people, students, or you donate some money for volunteers to do their works. So in this particular times, we have to synergize our movement lah, not to move even youth like to execute, but execution need to be in the ecosystem, and we had one another synergistically, so that we could produce a proper impact, and not just not have full impact. First of all, so my advice is, if you still have time in your studies, do participate in NGO, whatever niche that you like. Okay, so this have a lot in unprecedented time, such as natural disasters. Thirdly, this is very eye-opening actually for RUM, because I have my personal critiques to our clubs in RUM, where we move in very KPI centric, and this is what we call as a very kaku punya movement lah. So sense-serve ke apa kan. We tend to plan our takvim, one year plan, then we have our programs. So our programs is basically centered to KPI. So when natural disasters happen, it becomes an eye-opener for we students or clubs organizer, where sometimes things doesn't have to be planned, and we should not stick to just for fulfilling the KPI, but to be sure the orientation of our activism is to serve the society or the community. Hence, basically there is three major steps of precaution for youth to take when it comes to natural disaster. So first, be informed, and be very, very informed what happened in our country, and be aware what caused another, so we know which should be blamed and what should be not. Okay, and secondly, be in the ecosystem, so that we can play our role in whatever area. Okay, and please, if you have free times, do engage in NGOs or clubs that you feel comfortable with or you feel interest with. And lastly, this is an eye-opener for youth, especially clubs in IUM, to not be very KPI centric, but to be goal centric or vision centric, which is we end up need to serve back to the society and also community. So when natural disasters happen, it feels very relief for me lah, to see youth turun bantu without less birokrasi kan, dia tak ada ketat kerja sangat. So basically that's my answer lah, 3 points in terms of what measure can be taken by the general public, especially youth in facing unprecedented natural disasters.
Thank you so much, Brother Huzayl. So from there, from what you just stated, we can see that the youth, again, are very engaged, and we are very thankful for that, for the amount of manpower we have from the youth. So Alia, would you like to ask Dr. Rabiah the next question?
Yes. So, as you know, on July 26, 2021, YB Nurul Izzah, the MP for Permatang Pau in Penang, had actually raised the possible flood issue in Parliament, insisting that the government consider it into the National Recovery Plan for necessary preparations. However, this warning did not seem like a priority at the national level. So, Dr. Rabiah, what is your take on this?
Okay, I think first of all, I will touch on 2 issues. First of all, like Brother Huzayl mentioned, that there is sort of a instability in terms of politics. Therefore, the fragile coalition, political coalition that we have now means that there is no strong authority at the federal level to actually control and manage the disaster response. And as I've mentioned, initially the natural disaster response should be under the Deputy Prime Minister, but we don't even have Deputy Prime Minister. And we have Prime Minister, but even then politically he is depending on the support of many political coalitions. And I think it is after 1 week of the flood happened that he actually had to call back his ministers or his cabinet members from abroad to return to Malaysia and address this issue. So I think in this particular aspect, it shows that somehow the political condition or political climate also has, contributed to the lack of response to this particular disaster, even though not just YB Nurul Izzah actually, even though she has raised the issue in Parliament, the Meteorological Department also actually have issued warnings, several warnings, to say that the rainfall that will have that would occur would be equivalent to a month rainfall, right? And also, if I'm not mistaken, the Selangor government also actually had published their own list of flood-prone areas in November, but we could see that there have been lack of response. It's not that we do not know, but it seems that we do not know what to do with this information. And then also in terms of the structure of disaster management response in Malaysia, first of all, we have to acknowledge that there are several challenges. One of the main challenges is there is imbalance between the top-down and bottom-up approaches. The disaster management in Malaysia is very much top-down approach, meaning that there is a lack of information, data, and actions could be taken by those on the ground. Even though we have 3 tiers of governments to manage disasters, but in actuality, the orders, the instructions is very much top-down government-centric model, where the NADMA and also the National Security Council would be responsible for matters related to policies on disasters risk management. Yeah, and if we look again in the disaster management in Malaysia, there are a number of players. There are about 68 agencies involved in executing disaster management process in Malaysia, but there is a lack of coordination, right? So they are not talking to each other, and I think that is one of the reasons why, even though there have been several warnings in the legislature by the executive, but it seems that there is lack of action because of, first, the political situation. Second, it seems that because of the political situation, like Brother Huzayl also pointed out, people were busy with election. And also, if we look at the politicians as well, they were busy playing politicians' role rather than playing a role as an executive, as a leader of executive agencies, right? So that's why we have a lot of this, how to say this, where you have political actors that are supposed to lead the agencies, but they were busy playing the politician roles. Yeah, they went down and do things that they should not do even. They should be behind the scene and coordinating all the efforts, but they go down on the ground and they wanted to show their image, political image for the upcoming election. And also because of the lack of coordination between government agencies. There are 68 agencies. It is a humongous task to actually bring all these agencies together. Yeah, and also there is a very top-down centric approach, which make it like a lack of room and space for the bottom-up agencies or agencies on the ground to actually do things that are relevant to their localities. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. So what we can conclude from this is that good communication is very much needed in order to ensure fast actions, especially when natural disasters happen or any sort of crisis happening in this country.
And also, as being a politician itself, not just focusing on being on the image of a politician, but also putting our efforts and putting ourselves into the field and helping those who are supposed to be helped as the people who will vote for these politicians.
Totally
So
agree.
with that, we will be taking another short break. To keep you refreshed, stay tuned with Political Insights and our discussion, and we will be back
Video ke? So, pembuatan insight behind the scenes dari PEs. PR, content manager, host yang terbesar. Saya nak main game Naruto. Suruh dia masuk. Dah boleh. Busy. Tak. Sebab aku tak biasa dengan
Tak ini
aku tak cakap apa tapi soalan
for our future, for our
ini dia. Kita tanya audience jawab.
You forget apa-apa Umi dan I nak inform you juga ke, we'll use private search.
Sudah di masa tak panik.
Going live in 3, 2, 1, cue.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and welcome to Political Insights, 40 minutes of political knowledge. I am Ilya Marsha, your host for tonight, and thank you for tuning in for our second episode this story radio, our political student friend. So let us welcome our first politics.
and the what we call the demand from the outside, then it will be problem. They come up with any statement. But the issue, what I'm trying to say is that the issue, I want to share with you what has been done. The culture of intellectualism among the students, and also to empower the student standard in the campus.
So, as we are currently in the second half of the semester, I hope that everyone is doing great and fine and still riding their momentum to finish through the semester. Welcome back to Political Insights. We are currently navigating through the flash floods that has recently happened in Malaysia. So, thank you for staying with us. Now, let us proceed with the next question.
So for this next question is going to be for Dr. Rabiah. So could the public's view on the competency of the government in managing this unprecedented flood change the political landscape of Malaysia in the upcoming general election?
Wow, this is really a political question that I think I am not I'm not a fortune teller, but definitely I think the flood crisis has exposed the weaknesses of the current governments in terms of their response and the political parties that are supposed to be responsible as the government of the day. However, if you ask me, in reality, what we are seeing is that even though that there have been weaknesses in terms of their response, but I still think that it is very difficult to predict whether this particular flood response would actually affect public's point of view, because even though it's very noisy on the social media, but we have to remember that we have these gerrymandering practices in which most of the areas that have or carry more weight is actually the rural areas, right? While all of the noises are very much concentrated in the urban areas. And I think we also have to bear in mind in terms of the percentage of voters that will come out in the next election, and whether the most important thing is whether the opposition can actually get their acts together. So if you have a very weak government, but the opposition seems weaker now, they even bicker about who actually get more spotlight on social media, and they couldn't even come and sit together as a coalition. Rather, the opposition is very fragmented. I think even though that the public may not like the current government, but there is a high possibility for the current government to actually win again based on their performances in the past state elections, where the public trust in the opposition is lower than their trust in the current government. Yeah. So I think at this particular juncture, I would expect the public, if I am being realistic, the public may forgive the government if They cannot see that the opposition can get their acts together. And for now, the opposition is very much fragmented in the sense that you have diverse players, while even though the ruling coalition is more, seems fragmented as well, right? There have been bickering about PAS, UMNO, Bersatu, but it seems that they are much more united compared to the opposition, right? So it becomes again another case of which one of them is the lesser evil. So in my opinion, unless if the flood crisis may not change the political landscape in the next general election, but it may change the political landscape of Malaysia in the next decade. Yeah, because what we are seeing is that this particular crisis, flood crisis, has actually made Malaysians realize that they can have common points, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of their ethnicity, religion. But when there is disaster, this is our meeting point. Yeah, so I don't think it will change much in the next election, but in the next decade, definitely, because these young voters, and also there will be less of the older generations in politics, right? By natural causes, maybe, so that there are more spaces for young politicians to come up with more progressive ideas. That is my take on this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabiah. So, like, for the time being, in like close time range, we can't really predict what's going to be happening or whether it can change the opinion of the public or not. So, for Brother Huzayl, what do you think about this? What's your view of the youth on this aspect?
I mean, I couldn't agree more with Doctor lah, to be honest, because the election is very near, as I heard. Yeah, I think Doctor knows as well. It may be being held. I don't know, maybe in June or July, as early as that. So, and we know how government plays the politics. And yeah, as Dr. mentioned before, what happened in Melaka. So we have government have very bad track record managing the COVID-19. But however, they managed to win in the Melaka election. So it is very, very something that we have to ponder how and what strategy that government or the ruling party are using. Second of all, and yeah, I am very agreed about condition of opposition. So we can see that Pakatan Harapan, if I may say it here, quite unstable as well and quite fragile as well. They have their inner problem occurs between basically these three parties. And if you are aware of, there might be another coalition, the third force coalition, what people have said in Twitter and basically in Twitter, Muda, Pejuang, and also Parti Sabah, right, might have another coalition. So what happened is that these two coalition of opposition is berebut their own voters in the same pool. So people who voted to BN or current government will vote for them lah. So let's say I vote for PKR in previous election, but now we have two coalition, and I might vote for Muda. So yeah, basically the condition of opposition couldn't have much lah to change the political landscape in Malaysia. But I personally have a little hope, a little optimism in regards to the Undi 18 implementation. So, we may have like 2 million new voters, if I'm not mistaken, in this upcoming election. And if our generation of voters aware enough, play Twitter very much so that we are informed, it might give some impact on our political landscape. But to change it like how GE 14, I'm very pessimistic about it. Yeah, basically that's it.
Thank you very much, Brother Huzayl. So, like from both of Dr. Rabiah and Brother Huzayl's point of view, we can see that in the long run, we can see that the landscape of politics in Malaysia can be changed, but not too soon, not this soon. Alia?
Unfortunately, we have reached to the final question for tonight. So, what are your hopes for the future of Malaysia in overcoming any particular disaster management in ensuring the security of the public? Maybe Dr. Rabiah could answer first.
Thank you very much. My hope, my greatest hope is that we will give the right post and position to those who are qualified with knowledge. Yeah, what we are seeing here is that we have a system in which we have a very strong political patronage system, so that there are a lot of positions that are supposed to be manned by those who are those who have expertise and knowledge and also skills, are manned by those who are politically appointed. And I think my other hope is that we will have a much more coordinated efforts in disaster management, especially. I think we should move. I think Malaysians are very laid back, right? Whether it is the common public or also the policymakers and our politicians. Sometimes we often think that these two will pass. Of course, this will pass, but this kind of reactive responses are not helping. We need a much more long-term planning in which we have to focus on the long-term plans on how to mitigate the risk of these disasters. Because whether we want it or not, we are going to live with a much more challenging world, marked by climate changes, marked by overdevelopment, and these are our realities, right? So we need to think, instead of just responding to the crisis as it happened, we need to think on how to mitigate this risk, right? And how to have a better planning so that we take into account all sorts of situations before we go with development processes and whatnot. So that is my greatest hope, especially, right? Because I think this also, if we go back to all these hopes, I think most importantly, we need to bring back ethics and values in our politics and civil service. Yeah, because only those, even though we have this very beautiful paper planning, but if we have those who are in charge do not have the right mindset, do not have ethics, do not have the right values, then all of this will still be beautifully written on papers, but maybe not going to be implemented well. Yeah, so that is my hope, so that we can have a much better risk management processes in Malaysia in the future, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabiah. I understand that us, being voters as well, we need to be very responsible in really choosing who we want to lead the country, because the future of the country is in our hands as well. So what about Brother Huzayl? What is your take on this?
First of all, in the perspective of youth, my very biggest hope is that, especially for IM students, and particularly for political science students, we learn a lot about the policy. We learn a lot about political ideologies, political strategies, and so on and so forth. So by default, we graduate as the people who know what happened in politics, what happened about politics. So we should take role as the youth to play like what Syed Hussein Alatas mentioned in his books, Intelektual Masyarakat Membangun, to be an intellectual, So what he mentioned by intellectual is the one who end up giving back to society, the one who end up serving back to community. Hence, UIA, I think, already started community engagement and so on and so forth. So we have to play our role as the youth and as intellectual and as a political science students to at least tell our community what we learn in political science classes. And second of all, in this situation, it shows us how we have ourselves. Kita jaga kita kan. So in first weeks, like rakyat yang tolong jaga rakyat instead of government tolong jaga rakyat. So it is clear that the lack of Weberian bureaucracy, and my hope is that Malaysia in future, we need to tally between risk management and also to reduce the cost of disaster management, and we have to tally it with the cost of the disaster. Like Dr. mentioned, Malaysia is a very unique place where we don't have flash flood, we don't have gempa bumi, but the disasters is man-made. So and lastly, as the youth, I really hope that we keep these times being an eye-opener for us to keep being a pressure group to ensure the check and balance towards government and authority, whether they do their job or not. And lastly, to future voters, please be informed and vote in the right way lah. Vote lah dengan bijak. Allah Alam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brother Huzayl. So what I can gain from this is that we can see that from the recent event, which was the flash flood, the people has got their own backs. So right now, the politicians and political parties need to set their differences aside, because at the end of the day, the priority is the people themselves.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rabiah, and also Brother Huzayl. That very much sums up the last question and the ending of our episode. So so far we have discussed that this past few years, of course, we've been going through COVID-19, the pandemic, the endemic, and now we have been given the challenge of having flash floods here in Malaysia, one we did not expect to be this bad. And what we can see is that us citizens have each other's backs, and the youth as well are very engaged and are helping taking place in doing what the government should be doing. So I'm hoping that us youth in itself is already giving such a big impact and already pressuring the government to actually do something about it, even though they should have done it from early on, from the beginning. So my hopes for the future is that in the upcoming election, that us youth can maybe shift the political landscape of Malaysia, even if it's just a bit, but hoping for a better Malaysia in the long run. Not just a government that's perfect on paper, but one that is perfect for the citizens of Malaysia.
Yes, and I think my hopes and dreams for the country is that hopefully in the future we'll be able to have better candidates and people who are actually worthy of the job in order to ensure a better future for Malaysia. So special thanks to Dr. Rabiah and Brother Huzayl. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and insights. We have definitely gained a lot, and hopefully the viewers have gained a lot as well. So if you're keen to know more about politics, be sure to stay updated with us. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow IIUM TV on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, and our latest account on LinkedIn. And not to forget, also Instagram.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Rabiah. Thank you, Brother Huzayl. And thank you to our precious viewers for joining us for the final episode of this season. Do not fret. We will be back for season 6. So until then, this was Political Insights, 40 minutes of political knowledge.